Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins, and I'm the guy with the really froggy voice because my voice is just gone, and I don't know why, but I'm going to get through this because I'm excited to talk to our guest today at Your Black World, Miss Susan Patton, aka the Princeton Mom. How you doing today, Susan?
Fantastic. Happy New Year to you, boys, and to all of your listeners.
Yes, same to you, and you have a legion of listeners. I mean, the Princeton Mom is
Yep.
loved and hated in different parts of the globe,
Well,
and I'm one of the
loved
people
and
that loves
hated
you.
yourself, Dr. Boyce. You're a little bit loved and hated as well.
What? Wait! I thought everybody liked me. What? You
Well,
really? Really? Oh,
you're selectively reading your own comments.
oh man! That that hurts my feelings. That really hurts my feelings. But hey, we persevere. Um, I wanted to ask you about this crazy thing that happened, and I think this is interesting because you can maybe give me what I might call white people insight into this. The Revlon CEO. Lorenzo Del Pani is accused in a lawsuit of making some comments that were defined as being racist against blacks and Jews. So some anti-black comments, anti-Semitic comments, and one of the things that he allegedly said, and again, I think it's important to say allegedly because this is a lawsuit, right? A lawsuit is when people sort of throw things out and try to make you look as
Right.
bad as possible, and I don't think we should always take it as fact. But he's accused of saying that he could smell a black person when he entered into a room after a meeting in South Africa. And so obviously the PR damage for Revlon has been huge,
Hmm.
and it really. Now here's the thing: a lot of people were upset when they read what he allegedly said, and I think that their emotion was not just driven by this particular incident. There's a backdrop there in terms of experience in corporate America. Just you know, many African Americans feeling like hey, if I get on the job and I'm around a bunch of white people, I'm not necessarily going to be seen the same as everybody else, or the first thing people might notice about me in some cases is the color of my skin,
Well,
and so
that's
so do you,
probably correct. That's
yes.
probably correct. And I read this as you did. I think we both posted this on our Facebook pages. Being so stunned by the utter stupidity of this man,
Mm,
the utter stupidity of it. It didn't even strike me so much. I mean, clearly it was racist. Clearly it was anti-Semitic. What he said is that he could smell a black person in the room and that Jews all stick together. All right, I could think of a whole lot more racist things to say and a whole lot more anti-Semitic things to say than that. It was stupid. It was just stupid of him. He revealed himself to be just a stupid person. I mean, is it really so racist to say, well, I could smell when black people have been in the room? What a stupid thing to say. What a stupid thing to say. I mean, certainly it's racist, but it's not as damaging. It's not as ugly a comment as he could have made about black people. And when he said, and all Jews stick together, who cares? All right, they do. As all blacks stick together, as all, Episcopalians stick together, as all affinity groups, people who are connected by some commonality, they do stick together. Did it strike me as an anti Semitic comment? I'm sure it was intended as an anti Semitic comment, but it reflects more on how stupid this man is than it does on the fact that Jews as a group stick together in the same way any affinity group sticks together. I'm sorry, I
No,
interrupted you.
no, it was okay to interrupt. I want to encourage you to do that. Feel free. I saw his comment about blacks as kind of being one that's, might be a tip of the iceberg, right? We catch you saying one little thing, but we've kind of always had a sense that maybe from your track record on hiring or your managerial decisions that there's more to the iceberg than what we see. And what I'm thinking is that in many situations like this, in order to determine whether or not this person's biases have truly affected how he does this job, I think it's important
Yeah.
to look at his record.
Well, I think that is true. I
Right?
think that is true. And I also think that the fact that he would say just a stupid thing like this, again, it's not the worst thing he could have said. It's not the most racist thing he could have said. Does Revlon as a company have a track record of hiring black people? In fact, yes, they do. They have an aggressive policy on diversity. I know this because I'm an HR babe. This is my day job. I work for all kinds of companies, and almost every publicly held company or big company like Revlon, they do have a diversity policy where they specifically outreach to hire African American and other minority groups. But I think something that that you touched on here that I just wanted to get back to is the parsing of words. I would think that any community would look at this man's statements, and again, I would hope that what they walk away with is, what an idiot! What an idiot! Is he going to do harm to me as a Jew, as a black, as a Asian? I don't know, probably not, because he has an HR department at Revlon that will see to it that he doesn't. But he's just stupid. And I don't think that it benefits any group to jump on this, you're saying tip of the iceberg, and you're probably right. But there are times when just leave it alone. It's not worth parsing. It's not worth, trying to discover an underlying motive or some deep nefarious, I don't know. Going back to, I had mentioned this to you before, in our last conversation about race relations, and I was telling you about this conference that Princeton had for black alumni that I wanted to go to. It was my intent to, infiltrate is the word I used. And many of your listeners picked up on that word as some kind of awful thing. Well, it's not an awful thing. To infiltrate anything simply means to become a part of. The same way we would say, computers have infiltrated the workplace. It's not a bad thing. It's a statement of fact. All it means is become a part of. I mention this by way of saying, let us not all be so hypersensitive that even the smallest indication of somebody's bias is enough to set off such an extreme reaction. I think that this Revlon CEO is just a moron. He is just stupid, and he revealed himself to be stupid in the remarks that he made about blacks and about Jews. And I'm sure that if you heard what he had to say around his kitchen table when nobody's listening, you would walk away in disgust, as I would. But it reflects badly on him, not on you as a black man, and not on me as a Jew.
That actually leads to my next question. What is it? I've never been around a group of white people when black people weren't there, because if I'm there, the conversation might change, right? Particularly when it comes to race.
Maybe not.
No, but really, I mean, if you're sitting as a black person at a dinner table with a group of white people, and race comes up, I imagine there might be some sensitivity about what they say because you're there. But you've been in those conversations. You've been around white people when black people weren't there. And I'm curious to ask you, what are some of the most interesting things you've heard people say that they might say comfortably when a black person isn't in the room versus when they are?
Well, I think that what we deal with on a regular basis is, again, this hypersensitivity. I could say anything to you, boys, and I have. When you and I have talked privately, I've said all kinds of things to you that have made made your eyes roll. It's okay. You know that they're not intended as bad things. These are things that my young son has said to me, "Oh my God, Ma, don't ever say this kind of stuff publicly." But I could say it to you because you understand where I'm coming from. You understand that I intend no harm. But I think there is super sensitivity when white people are together. If the topic of black people come up, everybody is just scared to death to say anything lest they appear as racist. Are some of them racist? I don't know. Maybe they are. But everybody's not racist. But everybody is afraid of being seen as racist. So there's fear, concern about optics. And I hate that. I absolutely hate that. The idea that you're more concerned about what it looks like than what you actually mean. But that's a genuine concern among white people when they talk about black people. They don't want to be seen in a bad light. I talk about black people. It doesn't trouble me. I have enough black friends, and I think enough people recognize that I'm just speaking honestly. I don't think that I'm better or worse, or I think I'm different than black people, and you and I've talked about that because the black experience, the white experience is just different. The way we are approached by the world is different, and that, of course, makes us different because we're received differently by the world. I get that. But I think there's genuine concern in the white community to not faux pas, to not say the wrong thing, to not be seen as being, and I think it's an extreme concern, so much so that it hampers conversation. I think white people are afraid, are in some cases afraid to talk to black people lest they say the wrong thing and offend them. Me, I offend everybody all the time. So, yeah, and I never mean to. I swear to you, I never
Oh, you know you mean to. You know you mean
don't.
to.
I don't mean to offend you. I say what I think. I always can explain how I come to thinking the way I do. You may agree with me, you may not agree with me, but we don't have to agree. This is a conversation. And if we disagree, which I love, that means you're seeing something I'm not seeing, so show it to me. Show me what I'm not seeing that you're seeing because that's how I'll learn.
Well, that leads me to another thought. Okay, so when we had a conversation about race about a week or so ago, and a lot of people had a lot of things to say, and one thing that's interesting, and we mentioned this in the previous conversation. I think people should know this. You didn't grow up in a lily white environment. Right? You went to school, and you said there were pictures where you were the only white kid in the picture. So there was a comfort, familiarity with African Americans. Um,
Right.
Now, do you think that comfort and familiarity makes it more or less likely that in conversations about race you're going to say something to offend someone? Because here's what I found. I found that there are some cases where the least racist white person is the one who will be attacked for being racist because they're comfortable with black
Right.
people, and they're comfortable enough to be honest, right? They just say what's on their mind, and someone interprets it as racism, and it's the furthest
Right.
thing from their mind because they're thinking, wait a
That's
minute,
it.
my first boyfriend was black, or my other family was black, you know what I mean, and so it kind of ends up becoming this sort of weird, almost reverse sort of
That's
thing. I don't
right.
know if you what you'd call it. Have you gone through that?
I know exactly what you're talking about. And I was surprised that after our last conversation, which was so open, it was such a smart, comfortable, just a welcome exchange of honest thoughts and ideas. I was surprised that there was so much commentary suggesting that I am a racist. Maybe I don't even know what a racist is. If a racist, you're laughing, and I'm serious. If we're saying that a racist is someone who thinks that black and white people are not identical, well then, yeah, I guess I'm a racist. But black and white people are not identical. You and I both know that. We have had that conversation. That doesn't make me a racist, and I'm not a racist. And to be called that was upsetting to me. And there were several of the commenters that were anti-Semitic in their responses, and I'm wondering what up with that. Why ever would people listen to our conversation of last week and think, Jews are bad, Jews will take advantage of you, Jews will hurt you, Jews can't be trusted? What? What up with that? What have I ever said or done to have encouraged that sort of, again, I'm going to say a stupid remark. Stupid, just like the Revlon CEO. This is a stupid remark.
I think that and I want to ask you about this. I think the first mistake in any kind of remark like that, any remark that begins with the Jews,
Right.
it seems the mistake is that you're saying the Jews, as if all
As if
Jewish people
you're
are the
all,
same, as if there's no heterogeneity. Can you talk about that? Because I had a really good conversation with Cornel West about that, where he actually approached another black leader and said, you talked about the Jews, but what he said was that there are different kinds of Jews. They're all, they're very diverse, very heterogeneous. So you really can't say you can't lump everybody together. And
Yeah.
believe it or not, he said that the two had a 12-hour conversation about this, where they pulled out the Bible and really went through it in detail. And after that, he said that the person never used that phrase again. So can you talk about that heterogeneity a little bit, so that people can at least be a little more thoughtful in their critique, or any honest response that they might
Sure.
have?
Sure. Well, firstly, I love Cornell West, Brother West. You know, he taught at he is Princeton, I think, class of '80. He taught at Princeton, and my young son, who just graduated in June, took his freshman seminar on African American culture. And you know, he said it was a blast because Brother West is as animated, as funny, as passionate, and as crazy as you see him. You know, well, you know that you've been with him. You know that. Uh,
He is the most wonderful public figure that I know of today. He is the closest thing we have today to Martin Luther King. And people get mad when I say it sometimes, and some people agree. But I tell them, look, if you study Dr. King, you study Cornell West, you'll see a lot of similarities. Don't miss
yeah,
your opportunity to appreciate him. Please continue.
yeah, yeah. So you know, we're you and I both were big fans of Brother West, most certainly. Um, yeah, I think that Jews and blacks, you know, it's interesting. There's much that we share by way of cultural background. Certainly, you know, I know that Jews frequently feel as though the hostility towards them from the black community is unfounded and unfair because Jews have always been at the forefront of civil rights. Uh, Back in the 60s and today, always, Jews have been at the forefront of civil rights, which has included, obviously, the black community. Um, I think where it gets problematic, and you and I have talked about this off camera before, is when Jews say, we have suffered the way blacks have suffered. Well, yes and no. Yes, we most certainly have suffered in the past century. In fact, we have suffered extremely, but not in this country. And I think that's what makes the conversation. That's where the conversation turns. It's the way blacks have suffered in the United States versus the way Jews have suffered in the United States. Critical to understand, and I do, but many Jewish people don't get this, and I've had this I've gotten into arguments with Jewish friends about this frequently, that because America was the liberator of the Jews, we were never enslaved by America. We were liberated by America. And this is close to me. I've mentioned this to you before as well. Both of my parents actually are survivors of concentration camps. My mother was in Auschwitz. My father was liberated from Bergen-Belsen in 1945, liberated by America. So it's very close to me that America was the liberator of the Jews, where it was clearly the enslavers of the blacks. So this is a very fundamental difference that I think Jews sometimes lose sight of. And it must, you know, I've said this to you again privately, and it bears repeating. I recognize that it's difficult to be a black person in America. I think a black person in England or in France or someplace else is probably a very different experience because there isn't that history of enslavement. But in America, we are dealing with a history that is undeniable. Some would say inescapable, although you and I have we have touched on this before too. You got to get past it. You got to get past it to help yourself to move forward, and you can't be living that past. You always remember that past, obviously, but you have to get beyond it because it will hamper you. You said it in our last conversation, I think you did. No one's going to feel sorry for you that your great grandparents were slaves, and that's true. You have to get past that, move forward, and create your own legacy. But I think the Jewish question, how as it pertains to blacks, it's troubling that the black community and the Jewish community aren't closer. They actually should be. They actually should be. We have both been underdogs. Although in America, it is different. It is different. But I wouldn't want to be a Jew in Germany. And honestly, if I were a black person, I don't think I would live in America.
Well, I think that well, two things come to mind. Based on what you said is, one, I think that when you talk about blacks and Jews getting closer together, I think that once again we have to go back to that point of heterogeneity that we agreed on earlier, which is that there are many pockets of society where blacks and Jews work very closely together, right? As you talk about civil rights, or even now with all the protests going on around the country, there are lots of Jews who are participating in that. But then you have other places where that closeness doesn't exist. You look at some of the tension that's occurred in Brooklyn over the years, and then you got some other areas, even in the music industry. Some people have said that there are certain individuals that have promoted destructive music or that features Black Americans saying these really ridiculous, stereotypical, disgusting things, so I think that to your point, there are places where we work together, places where we don't. But again, that's heterogeneity, right? If you say that
Right.
about Asians and whites, or about blacks and whites, or blacks and Asians, there are places where we work together, places where we don't,
There we
right?
go.
And it's all about whether or not our incentives are aligned at that particular time. Now, the point that I want to I want to throw in another perspective on, and not one that says that you're wrong, but one that says that this is another point to consider, is that when we talk about the past, what happened in the past, I think it's
Mhm.
very important to understand that if I go and I say, this is the history of America, we need to understand this. One of the things that I'm saying is is agreeing with you first and foremost. At the end of the day, nobody's going to feel sorry for you. You've got to overcome it. You got to move forward.
Right.
But the point that also must be considered is that much of what we see in the present exists because of what happened in the past.
In the
The,
past.
the disparities that exist in America, particularly when it comes down to wealth, when you see that white kids have so much more wealth on average than black kids. Not every white kid is wealthy, we know that. But when you look at the means and the medians and the statistics, you see white family wealth being 10 times higher than black families, which reshapes just every way you go through life, right? When you start at the age of 22, 23, and you get married, and your grandparents can give you a house when they die. That's a very different reality than struggling and starting over with $100,000 in student loans and nobody to help you, right? It doesn't mean that's an excuse. It's not an excuse. But when you look at when you aggregate over 40 million people, and you're gonna see people that overcome all of that, right? You're always gonna have that kid. I know a kid. And she actually went to Princeton. Her name's Dominique Reese. Dominique, let me tell you about Dominique. Dominique grew up in Compton, California. Went to Crenshaw High School. She said when I graduated, she said nearly every black boy I knew was dead or in prison. A couple of them went to college. Most of them were dead from all they got machine guns and drugs and everything in the community. So she said a lot of my friends are dead. So I was traumatized. A lot of my friends were going on their way to prison. But yet she was the only kid out of her high school graduating class in the history of that school to go to Princeton. And so she's successful. She overcame all of that. But if you listen to her story, it's not a story that any kid should have to go through. She's been the victim of an attempted kidnap. She's had people try to molest her. She's had people try to murder her family. She's gone through all these crazy things that no normal teenage middle school experience should entail, right? So here's my point. My point is that you know communities are very different now than they would have been had the past not occurred. Right, the present exists because something built that present in the
Right.
past. I would say that again to your point, uh, at the end of the day, you have to overcome it. But I,
Exactly.
I think it's very important to understand that trajectory,
Knowledge.
to under
Knowledge.
right to acknowledge it, and then also to just sort of say, look, if we're going to move forward as this wonderful, loving, cohesive society that people want, one where we can just put the past behind us, there should be a conversation about helping to make things right. If my father did a harm to your father, and took away everything you had and gave it all to me, and let's say you're working for me and I'm abusing you, or not deliberately, but I'm the boss. I'm telling you what to do. If you know what I mean. If my value systems overwhelm your value system, so if you want to do something, it doesn't. It's only okay if I agree to it, right? Because I control everything. I own everything. I practically own you. And I say, but Susan, why can't we be friends? Why can't we just put the past behind us? What our fathers did, that has nothing to do with us. We want to be friends. In order for us to put that behind us, no, okay. And let me finish that point, and then I'll let you get to you. So in order for us to move forward, though, there's going to be a point where you might say to me, "But Boyce, look at this beautiful house you have. Look at this car. Look at all this money you have. That came from my family. If you want us to really truly be friends and truly love each other, you've got to help make this right. You can't just say that it's going to make itself better because you're not repeating the oppression, right? So I think that's the issue about racism. Racial inequality doesn't go away just because we decide to stop being racist. There is some work that has to be done to correct the structural imbalances that exist because of the way our society was built on a racist foundation. Now, I'll let you respond to that point. I didn't mean to keep going. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. An interesting point, and I use interesting in the way that we describe an ugly baby as interesting. What an interesting looking baby. No, you have to stop perpetuating this idea that you are owed something more and better than what everybody else has. You're not. I understand that there is a history that has put in place certain structures that may not work to your advantage, and I say that as we have a black man sitting in the White House. So,
But remember though but remember, one black man sitting in the White House does not mean that 40 million black people are sitting in the White House. Think about the Hunger Games. Remember, if you look at the Hunger Games, what do? They take, well, if you watch that film, you should watch it because it's an interesting story about oppression. What they do is they take one person from the lower class and elevate them as a beacon of hope.
right?
Remember, Obama used the word hope as well when he ran for president, and the beacon of hope says, look, if this person can make it, all of you can make it. But really, one person makes it, and the other 20 million don't make anything, right? So sometimes that symbol can be used as an excuse for additional oppression, right?
That also, I think, these are excuses. These are excuses. If Dominique can find her way out of that morass out in California to get herself to Princeton and all the misery that she lived through, I think we have to encourage young people, not just black people, all young people. Your future is in your own hands. You are the architect of your life. Stop falling back on anything that happened hundreds of years ago. It won't help you. It simply won't help you. My parents came to America in 1949. I frequently said, I feel like my parents are Adam and Eve. There's no family before my parents that can be traced, or there was nothing. My father worked in a grocery store on the Lower East Side for years. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. You have to make a decision for yourself that you're going to rise above your circumstance. Just decide to do it. And I think we have to encourage young people, and certainly in the black community, because as you've described, they're failing in huge numbers, in enormous numbers. We have to encourage these young people, remind them, you are the architect of your life. You have to rise above your circumstance. You have to be strong enough to push aside the temptations that would lead you down the path of drugs or firearms or whatever's going to land you in jail, because no good will come of that. And when you're saying that special consideration should be afforded to sort of level the playing field, is basically what you're saying. I hate the idea of affirmative action, because why Why is that so funny to you, Dr. Boyce? Why is
Well,
that so funny?
it's not that it's not. No, I'm not laughing because you're wrong. I'm really not, and because in fact, what's really interesting to me is that I get criticized by black people a lot because everything that you've just said about encouraging your children to overcome and to fight and to be the best they can be, I've said these things all the time. And what happens is people think that it's an either or argument, and I say it's a both and. I will say everything that you just said about what an individual needs to do to overcome these obstacles. But when you're talking about 40 million people, where not everybody's going to be as focused as a Colin Powell or a Dominique Reese, etc. You're talking about 40 million people. That's where structures and systems do make a difference.
Okay.
If I change the tax law and increase the tax rate by 1%, just a tiny amount of money, you would see literally billions of dollars in aggregated wealth change direction because on the margin there are always going to be those companies that are going to change their business strategy based on changes in the tax law. Now, does that mean that any individual company can't overcome that modest change? Of course not. Right? Anybody can. But I think when you're talking about the aggregate, the question to me is not so much whether or not a Colin Powell or Dominique Reese or Barack Obama can succeed. They will always succeed. Let's be clear. And I love to duplicate them as much as possible. The question is, what about that average kid? What about that kid who makes a couple of mistakes in his life? He's 15 years old. He gets caught with 5 pounds of weed. Not 5 pounds. That's a lot of weed. Let's say a pound of weed, half a pound of weed. Which I agree. I'm going to be the first to
No
say,
amount of weed is
right.
acceptable.
I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. I agree. But the question though is that do we want to live in a society where that black kid with a pound of weed is going to get 5 years in prison, and the white kid with a pound of weed isn't even going to get probation? He gets to go to college, rebuild his life, make everything okay. The other kid's got a criminal record. Or should we
Okay.
live in a society where, one kid down the street on the south side of Chicago makes one little mistake? He gets in the fight with the wrong bully at school and gets his brains blown out. And then in the suburbs, if he fights the bully, he just gets beat up. Right, because in one neighborhood you're letting gun manufacturers dump their guns in the communities where it doesn't matter how you raise your kids, you can raise your kids perfectly, but other people, if their kids aren't being raised properly, those kids can kill your kids, right?
I do understand. I do understand. But all right, I got a million things to say about everything you just said. First of all, being in the wrong place at the wrong time is not race specific. That could happen to anybody. So, two, you keep talking about the aggregate, these 40 million kids who are failing. Don't talk about 40 million. Talk about one kid. Everybody individually is responsible for their own life. You're not going to change the lives of 40 million people collectively. I'm saying we have to deal with this individually, one at a time, one kid at a time. Don't look at it as a problem of 40 million because that's overwhelming. You can't begin to address that. I'm saying every single kid, one at a time, has to be reminded you can rise above your circumstances. Stay away from drugs, stay away from firearms, do your homework, recognize that education is the key to options in your life. It's the key to options. Is it the key to happiness? I don't know that, but I know it's the key to options. So I think that it's a mistake to look at it as a problem of 40 million because, wow, who could go even near that? I'm saying we look at this as an issue. We should be looking at this as a one individual. Every one of these kids individually. Don't lump them together as this group of 40 million who are destined to fail. I think that's troubling. I think it's so pessimistic. And I think you do a disservice to these kids to lump them together in this group of kids who are these 40 million kids who are going to fail.
Well,
Affirmative
I
action.
wouldn't say 40 million kids are going to fail. I would say 40 out of 40 million kids, you're going to have a curve, a bell curve, right? You're going to have the lump in the middle and then the extremes, right? You've got the kids that can be given every opportunity in the world who are still going to blow it. And then you got the kids who can have every obstacle in the world who are still going to succeed. My concern is, as a person that also focuses on just policy, is what happens to that lump Why is one bell curve for, say, white kids different from the lump in the bell curve for black kids? And I would argue that the difference is not due to any sort of superiority in terms of thinking or in terms of child rearing per se. Although we can debate that, if in a different context. I would argue that the difference in many cases is due to structure of environment and policy. If I'm a kid, listen seriously, if I'm a kid who grows up in a community where there are no jobs, the schools stink, there are drugs and guns on every corner, I'm going to, on average, have a different outcome than a kid who grows up in a scenario where everything's safe, there are positive role models, and good things are happening, right? And so environment does matter, right? It's nature and nurture, stuff like that. But again, I think that what you're saying, though, deserves to be heard. And I think I would imagine the critical point in a conversation like this is for everybody to listen and try to learn from different points of view. And because the reason I wanted to talk to you, and the reason, and even though I knew we wouldn't agree on everything, in fact, when you suggested we talk about race, I was like, oh gosh, how's this going to go? But the reason I wanted to talk to you about it was because I think people can learn a lot from you. I mean, you went to Princeton, you are very successful, you've done a lot of great things in your life, and you've been around a lot of black people, so you're not afraid to tell us the truth. And I hope people see it that way. One thing I'll also say is that, as you read the comments, there are going to be extremes. You're going to see people, some people with legitimate points who may say nasty things, but then you're going to see people who say nasty things because they're projecting, because they're so, the pain of their own experience has been so intolerable that they're just lashing out at anybody, at you, at me, at everything. That's why I don't read the comments.
And we talked about this a little bit when we spoke last week about how white people are fearful because they recognize there's rage in the black community. There is rage, out and out rage. And the truth is, if what has been done to the black community was done to the white community over time, we would set a torch to the place. I get that. I totally understand that there is that kind of rage. And a little afraid of how is that going to manifest. And I don't want to be around when it does, So I think that puts a lot of white people on edge, thinking, wow, how is the black man's rage gonna touch me? How is that going to affect me? And it's frightening. It's frightening. I think it's so huge, and in some cases it's repressed, and in other cases it's not. But it's very real. And however it manifests, it's not going to be good. Unless that rage is able to be turned into something that propels you to success, that propels you to greatness. And I think that's what is possible. I think that all young people need to be reminded, again, they are the architect of their life. If they're coming from a bad situation at home and a bad community and a bad school and a bad everything, you have to figure out at your earliest possible opportunity how to get the hell out of all of that. And whether that means you join the military or whether that means you join, I don't know, the priesthood, I don't know. What gets you out of that? I don't know what gets you out of that. I mean, for me, I knew I had to get out of the Bronx. I absolutely had to get out of the Bronx when I was a teenager. It was a destructive place for me. My parents, I think I've mentioned this to you, and if not, it bears repeating. My parents were not supportive of my going to Princeton. They didn't even know what Princeton was. They were not supportive of my going to college at all. They wanted me to get married and have children and live a comfortable, quiet life in the Bronx as they did. Well, that wasn't what I wanted. I applied to Princeton as an emancipated minor. I put myself through school. I went to Princeton against my parents' wishes. I paid for it myself. It was not easy, but it is doable. It is doable. I knew that the way out of the Bronx was going to be through education, through school. I knew that. We have to encourage young people everywhere, if they see that their surroundings are not conducive to living the life that they want to live, you have to do something different. You have to figure it out. Talk to a rabbi, talk to a priest, talk to somebody who can steer you towards something else that can help you change your life. It's horrifying I believe the statistics that you're quoting, Dr. Boyce, because I know you wouldn't throw these numbers out of nowhere, but this is appalling. This is an appalling statistic, if this is accurate, that 40 million young black people are destined to fall through the cracks, is that really what you're saying? That they're going to wind up?
Well, I don't think they're destined necessarily to have any outcome other than what God and the universe intend for them. But when you look at the data, particularly black males, the struggle is very real, and it's something that it doesn't mean every black male is destined to fail. But if you really kind of look at what I call the cultural tornado for black men, it's one that is not always optimistic. For example, one of the things we're constantly fighting are media images. This music that's being promoted by people who aren't black. It's maybe the rapper is black, but the label is not run by black people that are promoting images that tell black men that they should be thugs and they want to be killers. They want to do all these
I
terrible.
don't know that. Who owns these labels? I
Um,
don't know these
Well,
labels.
I don't know. It's mostly kind of if you look at, for example, a Sony or Universal, it's a
Well,
collection of shareholders that are kind of doing what capitalism does, which is okay. We're going to aim for the thing that we think is most profitable. But sometimes the direction with which they invest their money is determined by stereotypes, and what ultimately occurs. That we're fighting against constantly is that sometimes when we're going in and we're sharing messages similar to what you're saying about overcoming and education and stuff like that, in many cases someone else has gotten to them already. It's and a lot of times it's the media. Even good parents, really good parents that want the best for their sons, will say, I'm telling my son this, but media in the world are telling him something different. Or even, or I've known good kids who were murdered by bad kids because some guy just came up and started picking on you and your girlfriend or whatever. So it's kind of a complex thing, and I think that what I would encourage you to kind of process is this fact that you know I would argue that for black males, any extraordinary, intelligent, hardworking, focused black male is typically going to be successful unless something really bad happens along the way. My question is, what is the penalty for being average? What is the penalty for making a mistake? And I would say in our society, the penalty for a black male to make a certain kind of mistake is typically greater than it is for other people,
we've
because
had
right
this conversation,
because
and I get what you're saying.
yeah we,
I
we,
get what
we,
you're
we we
saying.
talked about that, right?
But you gotta not go near drugs. Come on, you gotta not go near drugs. When white boys get in trouble, it's because they're speeding, on the highway. I don't know. I don't really understand the breakdown between why white kids get in trouble when they do and why black kids get in trouble when they do. But it certainly seems like black kids, for some reason, are gravitating towards the things that will cause them the worst repercussions.
Well,
What
I,
up with
I'm
that?
I, I'm not gonna say that. And I'm glad you brought that point up, and I'm glad. And in fact, I'm happy that you asked it as a question as opposed to simply making a statement. But you can make a statement. You make a lot of them, and I think you should. But I think also learning from each other is important
Sure.
too. One thing I've observed, and I've spent a lot of time around black people and more time around white people. I taught for 20 years on college campuses that were majority white, and one thing I noticed was that there was a lot of stuff going on these campuses, especially when we talk about drugs and alcohol. In fact, I almost got into a fist fight. Believe it, I haven't told anybody this story. I almost got into a fist fight with another Syracuse University faculty member because I said you need to stop encouraging law students to go out and get drunk every time they have a social gathering. This is bullshit. They should be working to build their futures, not being turned into these future alcoholics. So we got into it. So my point here though is that when you talk about drugs, the worst of the worst drugs, you want to find drugs, go to college campuses. I mean, that's where you see the kids experimenting with all kinds of stuff that I don't know a single black man who tries things like LSD. I might have known one guy who tried cocaine. Most of the guys I know don't. I can name a lot of college students who tried those drugs, and what you find is that police will never raid a college campus. They almost never will. Maybe every blue moon. Like I think in Columbia there was a drug dealer on campus and they went into that. But you talk about campus parties on Friday nights when these things are going on. Police aren't going to stop and frisk, to see if you got anything on you if you're on a campus. But you go to certain communities, particularly poor communities, and not just poor black communities, but poor communities in general. But unfortunately, black males tend to be the greatest targets. You're more likely to be stopped. You're more likely to be caught if you are doing something illegal in that context because the police already have their eye on you from the beginning.
Well, they do, because you're talking about a neighborhood that is crime ridden or difficult, as opposed to a college campus that presumably is a safe haven.
But it's still
Is
it's still crime ridden, right? I mean, if drug use is a crime, that I mean, sexual assault is a crime, and those things happen on college campuses.
Although
So
I'm not understanding that drugs on college campuses are as big a deal as you're saying. I talked to my son who just graduated, and I asked him, are drugs like a thing? And he said almost not at all. Drinking, out of control. Drinking, out of control. Is there drug use? I guess there's some, but that's not as
well,
big a thing as you seem to think it is, or at least not on every
what
campus.
I'll say, and maybe we can look at the data, but one thing I can say is this: when kids in poor neighborhoods are selling drugs, most of the time they're selling to people who have the money, and the people who have the money are the the white kids who come in from the suburbs to get a hit or
And
whatever.
also, I have to interrupt you. I'll forget this because it's just a funny thing. I had a client once when I was in advertising and marketing, a very good guy. I loved this guy, and he used to talk about his brother as being a commodities. He was in commodities. He would always, his name was George, and his brother, he would tell me, George, he dealt in commodities. And I finally asked him, what kind of commodities exactly does your brother deal in that he's so wealthy that he does so much better than you do as a brand manager for, Procter and Gamble? His brother was a drug dealer. So the commodities were illegal substances, but I just love the way he classed it up by saying, "Oh, my brother, he's a commodities broker." Okay.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Well, yeah. I don't know too many commodities brokers anymore. I know some former commodities brokers, and but I think that we've been talking for 45 minutes, so we should probably shut it down. But I think this is a good conversation. I like talking to you because I get a chance to hear that other perspective. And I will agree with you. I think that fear of an honest conversation, it's a logical fear because
Yeah.
we do live in a society of polarities. And what I want to encourage people that are listening to do is try to understand the comments from this conversation. We've said a lot. Try to understand the comments you hate as much as you try to understand the comments you love. Because it may not be your version of the truth, but it is somebody else's truth. And I think that understanding each other's perspectives is the best way to move forward. It's the best way to learn, right?
I agree. I
As opposed to getting
agree.
upset.
And I
I'll
think
let you get the last word. Sorry.
and I think it's so important that we look at this as a one-on-one. It's unlikely we're going to change the vast spectrum of race relations collectively. We start doing it individually, and I think what's important is that we continue to have exchanges one-on-one with people who don't agree with us, who see things differently than we do. Do it individually, and I think this is how great movements begin, by one-on-one exchanges, by honest exchanges, by listening, by trying to understand, walk in somebody else's shoes, try to understand what they're dealing with, try to understand what they're living with. And I think that doing so on an individual basis is the smartest way and probably the only way to ultimately enact the huge sweeping modification in perspectives and in appreciation for people of a different race or a different perspective.
All right. Well, I love what you had to say, Susan. I don't read the comments that they bought. That's my secret. I don't get me wrong. I'll read some of the
I
comments.
always read the comments. And I'll tell you why I read the comments. Some of them make me laugh. Some of them are a little funny. Some of your viewers and mine as well are even more politically incorrect than I am. So I love that. I'm be right out there. Just open the kimono and just put it right out there. I love that. But I learn from the comments. I learn, and I appreciate the candor. I don't love the vitriol. I don't love I think that so much of the snark is just an idiot's version of wit. So I don't much care for that. But I do appreciate an honest explanation, an honest depiction of what do you think, what do you feel, how does this hit you. So I will absolutely continue to read the comments. I've held myself back from responding to the comments But I'm right on the verge, boys. I'm right on the verge.
Now that is a battle I would be willing to buy a ticket to see. I would love this. Yeah, I think it's well, you know what, I enjoy talking to you, and
I,
you know, and you know, I personally don't care if, you know, if people whether they like it or not. I just encourage people to think. You know, just I appreciate people watching and listening, but I encourage them to think for themselves. You know, if you're watching, your opinion matters just as much as ours. So please feel free to share it. And the goal at the end of the day is to learn from each other. And so I've learned a lot from you. Thank you so much, Susan,
I've
for your
learned
time.
so
I
much from you.
appreciate it. All right, and everybody, this is Miss Susan Patton, aka the Princeton Mom. Her book is called Marry Smart. Is that the title? Did I get
It
that
is,
right?
and I can be
Okay.
found on Twitter at the Princeton Mom. On Twitter at the Princeton Mom.
All right. So
Write something nice to me. Tell your viewer. Write something nice on my Twitter page. Write something nice. Come on. It's a new year. Let's make as a New Year's resolution to be more accepting, to be more welcoming of each other, to be more positive in the way we approach each other. Let us truly move forward in the spirit of brotherhood and kindness in the new year.
Well, you know, I will say that if you're going to be honest, and if your comment is going to be mean, at least be nice about it. How about that? You
Okay.
can be rough and still be polite. And so I'd say
I,
just at least be cordial and intelligent and mature. And if you do that, then, and you want to let us have it, feel free to do so. You know, people let me have it every day, and I'm totally okay with that. You know, I just enjoy being a part of this. So thank you again, Susan. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure to be with you. Happy New
Absolutely.
Year.
Oh, same to you. And everybody watching, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World. This is Susan Patton, aka the Princeton Mom. Make sure you go look her up on Twitter. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.